Hi, I'm Chelsea Comlo, and I'm here to present updates on FROST. And FROST stands for Flexible Round Optimized Schnorr Threshold Signatures. And this is joint work with my collaborator Ian Goldberg, who's at the University of Waterloo. And then along the way, a lot of work has been done by the Zcash Foundation team as well. So first, if you're not familiar with threshold secret sharing, it's a really important kind of underlying concept to FROST. And essentially what a threshold secret sharing scheme is it allows for partitioning a secret among a set of participants, such that recovering or using the secret requires cooperation among what's really important, a threshold number of participants. And so probably if you are familiar with threshold secret sharing, what one underlying primitive that's often used is called Shamir secret sharing. And this is a super well-known algorithm, and it's what FROST itself also builds upon. And so just starting into this talk, I'll first introduce some notation that we'll use throughout this talk. And so in a threshold secret sharing scheme, we often talk about N as representing the total number of allowed participants and T as representing the threshold. And we'll see how N and T are sort of really important in describing these schemes. So first, you might be wondering, why would you actually use secret sharing? Why is this kind of important in practice? So one reason why secret sharing might be useful is for disaster recovery. So essentially, if you have a secret on one machine and that machine is destroyed, then your secret is lost forever. And instead, if you're able to partition it and one machine goes down, then you're still able to use that secret in the future. Another reason why secret sharing is useful is because it raises the bar for an adversary. So again, if a secret is only on one machine and an adversary compromises that machine, then your secret is lost forever. However, if it's partitioned among a set of machines, then it's harder for an adversary to sort of compromise all of those machines. And then finally, a reason why secret sharing is useful is to partition trust. So essentially, what secret sharing requires is the cooperation among a set of participants in order to do something that's trusted. So that might be accessing a secret, that might be issuing a signature. Actually, so secret sharing was introduced in the 80s and the use case there was to actually sort of like protect nuclear launch codes. So you can see even like at its inception, secret sharing was sort of intended to protect trusted things and require cooperation among some cohort in order to do that trusted thing. So let's look at this a little bit more in detail. So I talked about a T of N threshold secret sharing scheme. So here we'll look at a 2 out of 3 example. So here we see we have one participant and they have one secret share. So let's say that participant's computer is destroyed. If you weren't using secret sharing scheme, that secret would be lost forever. However, if you're using a 2 out of 3 scheme, you still have 2 participants, each which still have their own share. And so what's important here is that the full secret can be recovered using any T out of the N participants. So even if participant 1 runs away, you can still have 2 in order to recover the secret. So again, kind of looking at our example, let's say we have a secret share and participant 1 becomes malicious. However, let's say we still have participant 2 and 3 and they're still honest. So again, here we can see that an adversary, even though they've corrupted participant 1, they still have to corrupt another participant in order to use that secret. And so something that's really fundamental to threshold schemes is that they require the assumption that the adversary controls fewer than T participants. So that's kind of like a really important security model that you're working within in secret sharing schemes, is that so long as the adversary controls fewer than the threshold, the scheme is considered to be secure. So in looking at threshold signatures, it's very similar to threshold secret sharing. However, in this model, your private key is still secret shared in the way that we looked at before, but you have one joint public key that represents the group. So here, kind of thinking again about this 2 out of 3 setting, you would require 2 participants to collaborate in order to issue a signature, and then that signature will be valid under this one public key that represents the group. So that's kind of how threshold signatures map to secret sharing schemes. And one thing that's kind of neat about these threshold signature schemes is that the full secret is actually never reconstructed. So participants perform signing using only their secret share stays on their machine. However, they are able to issue a signature. So that's something that's kind of nice in these schemes. And another thing that's nice is that the signature that's issued can look identical to a single party signature. And so this is attractive for privacy reasons and also for backwards compatibility reasons. So you're able to use the same verification algorithm for these multi-party schemes as you are for single party schemes. So I'm just kind of reviewing some applications of threshold signing. So one common one is issuing certificates, say by a certificate authority. Tor's consensus has looked at using threshold signing in order to issue their network consensus. Obviously, in the Zcash setting, authorization of financial transactions is really useful. And in general, just kind of looking at distributed authentication that requires a minimum number of signers. So when you're thinking about a threshold setting, if you think like, oh, I want some group, some cohort to authenticate this thing, threshold signatures is generally the right tool for the job. So I'm going to kind of take a sidestep really quickly and talk about the comparison to multi-signature schemes. So you may have heard of some kind of parallel work to Frost that's being done in the Bitcoin ecosystem by the Blockstream folks. And their scheme is called Music2. And essentially what they've defined is something that's very similar to Frost, but a multi-signature. And so I'm going to just kind of quickly talk about the differences between threshold and multi-signatures. So essentially a multi-signature is a compact representation of n signatures over some message. And in some multi-signatures, they are fully compatible with signature schemes like Schnorr in the same way that Frost is. But kind of like an easy way to remember the differences between threshold and multi-signature is n out of n. So you require n signers out of n possible signers, and threshold is t out of n. And another thing that's kind of allows for easy differentiation is that in a multi-signature scheme, every signer has their own public-private key pair. So key generation is non-interactive, whereas in a threshold scheme, key generation is interactive, and that's how you kind of get the T out of N access structure. So that's kind of an easy way to think about multi-signatures versus threshold. And so looking at some of the constructions and where Frost fits into these. So some trade-offs that exist in the literature and in related schemes to Frost are things like the number of signing rounds. So this is the required number of network rounds in order to generate one signature. Another trade-off is whether or not the protocol is robust. So if participants misbehave or if there's a network fault, robustness says whether or not the protocol can complete, assuming that there's at least a threshold number of signers. And then finally, another trade-off is whether or not the protocol is secure in a parallelized setting. So this is kind of where Frost and related schemes like Musig have sort of advanced the state of the literature, which is that signing operations can be done in parallel without a reduction in security, whereas prior schemes were vulnerable to this attack that was introduced by Drijvers et al. And essentially this attack is viable when signing can be done in parallel. So as I kind of alluded to, the contributions of Frost, we'll walk through these. And so first and foremost, Frost is a 2-round threshold signing protocol, or if you are comfortable with pre-processing, it can be a single round signing protocol with this kind of pre-processing stage. And as I said before, signing operations are secure even when they're performed concurrently. So you can kind of open an unlimited number of signing operations, and there's no reduction in security. And kind of I guess, like looking at some prior schemes in literature, there's often this kind of notion of an honest majority, which is different than the threshold required number of signers. So there's an honest majority that the adversary cannot corrupt versus a threshold required to sign. But in the Frost model, signing can be performed with a threshold number of signers, and security is assuming that the adversary controls up to T-1 signers. So these security model and the number of signers are the same in Frost. So now I'm going to kind of quickly remind you of single party Schnorr, and then we'll look at how Frost compares. So as I said, Frost is compatible with single party Schnorr verification, but I'll walk through the whole signing protocol. So in single party Schnorr, you start by performing key generation as the signer. And then in order to sign, the verifier will send the message and the public key. And so what the signer will do is they'll generate a nonce sampled uniformly at random. They'll generate the commitment. And then they'll generate this challenge. So the challenge is the hash of the commitment, the public key, and the message. The public key sometimes is part of the challenge, sometimes it isn't. Here we show it as being part of the challenge. And then they generate the response. And so essentially the response is a zero knowledge proof of knowledge of X, but bound to this challenge C. So you're proving knowledge of X with respect to this challenge, which is the commitment, public key, and the message. And so this signature is essentially just the commitment and the response with respect to the message M. And then verification, the verifier will rederive the challenge themselves. And then they'll derive our primed. And this is essentially what the commitment should be. And so the signature is valid if this commitment that they derive is equal to the commitment that's published in the signature. So now let's take a look at Frost and how it compares to single party Schnorr. So I'm not going to go into detail about key generation in Frost. It's basically the important thing to know here is that key generation can be performed either via a trusted dealer or by a distributed key generation protocol. So a trusted dealer in the setting is basically the same way that you'd perform a T out of N Shamir secret sharing, but here the secret S will be randomly generated, and then the public key is just the same way you would derive a public key in single party Schnorr. But here in this setting, S will be Shamir secret shared among the participants. The DKG is essentially an N-wise Shamir secret sharing protocol where every participant acts as the dealer. And what's important in that setting is that no party learns S, even though every party contributes to S. That's kind of the difference where the trusted dealer, they learn S, they're trusted not to do anything, versus in the DKG setting, no party learns that long-lived secret. And after key generation, every participant holds their secret share SI, and then they also have this public key YI. This isn't published externally, but it's used internally for verification during signing. And then we denote the joint public key as Y. So now looking at Frost sign. So Frost sign, as I said, can be performed in 2 rounds or can be optimized to single round with pre-processing. And here we show Frost using this notion of a signature aggregator, but it can also be performed without trusted roles if that's desired. So essentially for pre-process, this is the first round in this 2-round signing protocol. But I'll just introduce it in the pre-processing model. So every participant begins by generating 2 nonces, and then they generate 2 commitments to those nonces. And then they store these values locally, and then they publish their commitment. So what's different from the single party Schnorr setting is here they're publishing 2 commitments as opposed to 1 commitment. And if you're working in the pre-processing model, these values can just be cached. However, if you're in the single round setting, these will be published to everyone else. Yeah, okay, so that's what I just said. Okay, and then the second round of Frost, essentially you begin with this notion of a signature aggregator, and all they do is they select which participants will be performing signing. This might also be predetermined by the implementation. And so all they do is they collect all of the commitments for all the signers for that signing round. Oops. And then they send the message and this B value to everyone. So every signer will begin by generating this row term, and that's just the hash of their identifier, the message, and then this B value, which is all the commitments. They generate the group commitment, which is the product of every commitment, where one commitment is raised to that row term. Generating the challenge is done exactly the same way as in single party Schnorr. It's just the hash of the commitment, public key, and the message. And then the response is essentially just taking those nonces where one of the nonces is multiplied by that binding term. And then here, this lambda I times SI, that's doing, that's essentially the Shamir secret sharing part. So the lambda I is the Lagrange coefficient, and then multiplying by the challenge. So essentially when all of these responses are summed, this allows for essentially recovering this long-lived signing key S. So that's the Shamir secret sharing part. And so the trick with Frost is that using these two nonces multiplied by this binding term ensures that the step cannot be inverted by someone who doesn't know little di or little ei. And so then they send the response to the signature aggregator, and then the signature aggregator will publish the signature, which is the group commitment R, and then the sum of all of the responses. And what's nice about this is that the signature format and verification are identical to single party Schnorr. So essentially the signature can be validated in the same way as a plain Schnorr signature. So as I talked about, Frost does provide security against this attack called the Drijvers attack. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but just to kind of give you some intuition, without this binding term row, which is the hash of the participant identifier, the message, and that B term, essentially an adversary could produce some challenge C star, which is the output of a hash of some commitment R star, Y, and M star that is a forgery from the adversary. But we know from Wagner's algorithm and from the Drijvers attack that you can find some C star, which is equal to the sum of the output of some other hash outputs. So here you can find some set of commitments Ri, Mi that sum to this C star. And essentially that's coming from Wagner's algorithm, and the Drijvers et al. Authors noted that you can use this in a forgery attack against multi-signature schemes. So essentially what the adversary would do is they would receive all of the victims' responses for each Ri, Mi, and then the adversary would be able to produce a valid forgery with respect to this R star, such that this signature would be equal to the sum of all of the victims' SIs. So essentially the forgery would be the summation of the victim's valid responses, but it would be with respect to a message that the victim had actually never signed. So here, the binding factor in Frost just makes every response strongly tied to the message and then the commitment, so that essentially when you do this summation, it will actually result in an invalid signature. So that's kind of a whirlwind way of saying that this binding factor is important to protecting against this very specific attack that sort of relies on Wagner's algorithm and the fact that you can find a summation of outputs of a hash function, which is equal to another hash output of a hash function. Okay, so that's kind of the theory of Frost, why the design is that way. So now I'll kind of talk a little bit about some of the progress that's been made in the Zcash ecosystem. So we did finish an implementation of RedJubjub FROST that's been done for quite a while now. And we had it audited by the Taurus group. And one thing we're excited to say is that there were no major issues found. And then for all the minor issues, we've already fixed those up. So we do have an audited implementation, and we feel confident in its security. And so something that the team has been working on is finishing serialization and deserialization of Frost messages. So that's useful for doing network transmission or doing things like saving key material to disk. And one thing I just wanted to say is that the entire Zcash Foundation team has contributed here. So even though I'm giving this talk, the whole team has been involved. And so I just want to recognize them and all of the effort that they've been putting into making RedJubjub FROST ready to use. And where you can go to find this is in crates.io. So it is in our RedJubjub crate, and it's under the Frost module. And you'll see a lot of great documentation there, and we would love for you to try it out and send us bug reports, send us feature requests, or just tell us that it's been great to use. So I guess just kind of quickly about some next steps in terms of how Frost fits into the larger Zcash protocol. So as you know, the Zcash protocol achieves transaction unlinkability by re-randomization. And so we're essentially re-randomizing keys so that signatures can be unlinkable. And one thing that we've been working on in collaboration with Dara, Deirdre, Jack, and Sean is that kind of having several different notions of what it means to have unlinkable Frost signatures. So we have one variant where essentially we have this kind of trusted prover model. And then we have a second variant which doesn't require this trusted distinct prover. And I'm currently working on proofs for both of these models, and these are things that we'll have finished quite soon. So overall, just thinking about takeaways. So kind of one takeaway about Frost is that it defines a threshold signing protocol that's secure even when signing is performed concurrently. So that's kind of a nice thing that it improves upon in the literature. And something that the team has been really hard at work on is to make RedJubjub FROST ready to use. And Unlinkable RedJubjub FROST is coming soon. So look out for more information about that and some of our write-ups as it comes along. So that is all that I have, and I look forward to questions from everyone. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I have a couple of questions here already. So one question is, any subset of parties to the DKG guaranteed to only learn the combination of that subset's shares? So that's a I'm trying to parse that question. So essentially, the guarantee of the DKG is that at the end of the DKG, the party learns their own share, so their own secret signing share, and the public keys for all of the other participants, and the joint public key that's kind of published externally. So, and also the DKG guarantees that no participant can unduly influence the distribution of that secret and other kind of nefarious things. So I guess to answer that question, yes, the DKG guarantees that at the end, a party only learns their own share, such that signing requires a threshold number of signers. Yeah, I don't know if whoever asked that question wants to clarify, but okay, cool. Glad that answers the question. Have there been any operability discussions between the various Frost implementations? So it depends. So obviously, like between curves doesn't quite make sense. We are, so one thing we are working on is an IETF draft for a variant of Frost, where basically we're hoping to kind of define a standard message format and a standard protocol, and then there's just kind of the curves are specified sort of like as they need to be. So I guess the answer to that question is yes, modulo. It depends on what curve these implementations are over. So but yeah, obviously one nice thing about interoperability is, for example, if someone is implementing Frost on an HSM, it would be nice to be able to work within that HSM and like a hot wallet, for example. Okay, another question. Do messages require to be sent over an authenticated and secure channel? That is a very good question, and lots of people have asked me that. So what is important is that key generation requires an authenticated and secure channel because you are sending secret key material around to other participants. However, signing does not require an authenticated and secure channel. And the reason why is because when you sign, everything that you're publishing is a public value. So you're publishing public commitments, and then you're publishing your response, which is also a public value, and you're never actually exposing your secret to anyone else. Your secret always stays on your device, which is one really nice thing about threshold signatures. And so, yeah, kind of thinking about that question, key generation, yes, you need your network channel to be secure and authenticated. However, signing can be done over just a reliable channel. I don't see any other questions. So I think we have, oh, okay. One more question. Is the internet draft compatible with RedDSA verification, or is it based on another variant of Schnorr? So as I remember, RedDSA verification just requires that the public key is part of the challenge. If I'm wrong, please correct me. So I think, yeah. So basically the internet draft is just going to have the kind of in the EdDSA flavor already, where the public key is an input into the challenge. So I think the answer is yes, but I will relook at the RedDSA verification algorithm to make sure. Cool. Okay. I think that was good. Okay, so I have 1 minute. Thank you everyone for the great questions, and we look forward to your feedback about Frost. One question we have a lot is whether or not how usable the API is. So we would love feedback from people as you're trying out the API, if there's kind of rough edges or if the documentation can be better. So please let us know how we can make it better. So great. Thank you very much.